Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We've got some breaking news tonight. So just last night, when I was in this chair, I spoke with MS Now Justice correspondent Ken Dilanian about the wild behavior and spending of one Kash Patel, the far-right podcaster turned director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He hasn't spent a lot of time at the Bureau or been investigating much of anything, from what we can tell, but he spent a lot of time at sporting events and at concerts, drinking, partying, snorkeling at the Pearl Harbor Memorial, which is a little bit of an odd choice, traveling on his own government jet with his country music singing girlfriend. Well, today, Patel responded to some of MS Now's own reporting on how he spends his time in the government's resources, writing on social media, quote, "My jet ski is gold-plated, dumbass. Your job is to lie. Mine is to protect the American people, and business is good." Well, now tonight, the breaking news. We have exclusive MS Now reporting suggests Donald Trump isn't so happy with the job Patel is doing. The FBI director abruptly canceled a planned flight Friday to see his girlfriend in Chicago just as he was preparing to leave after top administration officials, frustrated with Patel, summoned him to the White House, according to two people with knowledge of the change. There appear to be several reasons for Patel's recall. Some in the White House reportedly found it confounding that the FBI director was leaving town amid the recent revival of the war with Iran and alleged threats against the president's life, according to a person familiar with efforts to help Patel rebuild trust with the White House. Another issue seems to be reports by MS Now and others about how Patel's lavish travel is being footed by you and I. Sources said there is at least one other unforced error. That would be the tweet today blasting us here at MS Now. Carol Leonnig is the MS Now senior investigative reporter who broke this story with colleagues Jacqueline Alemany, Ken Dilanian, Vaughn Hilliard, and Jake Traylor. When you've got 5 bylines, you know you can take it to the bank. Carol Leonnig. Well, so what were the circumstances, as best you can tell from your reporting, about how this was communicated to Patel? And then did he go to the White House?
He did. In fact, according to our reporting and our sources, he was basically commandeered back to the White House with plans to spend all of the day there. You know, Chris, when we first started this reporting, we were looking at, confirming, corroborating reports that he was scheduled to go to Chicago to visit his girlfriend. It's become a familiar pattern that he takes his jet to go see his girlfriend perform at various events. And this time it was at a country music street festival in Chicago, which is hosted in the parking lot of a large Chicago stadium. He was going to go to that event. He had, according to sources, scheduled a field office visit in Chicago, which FBI agents found really insulting. They felt like that was just a cover for him to be able to go see his girlfriend without any, annoying questions from reporters. That's how we started our day of reporting. But then we learned from our sources that on the tarmac this morning, Kash Patel was in a panic. He had to cancel the trip. He had to get to the White House stat because he was being ordered to come back basically to the principal's office to answer some questions and do some work. And there were a number of reasons. I have to tell you, I wish I knew precisely which one was the most important. And we don't know that yet, Chris. But you can imagine the 3 that you listed, right? We're at war with Iran. Iran tries to kill the president by recruiting people in the United States to kill him here. Number 2, he tweeted a very strange thing at MS Now about calling one of our columnists a dumbass and bragging about a jet ski that was gold-plated. And then third, the reason is that we've heard is that, one of Trump's most important and reliable allies in the Senate, Republican Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley, is now frustrated with Patel and trying to get answers to questions about the expenses of his travel to Milan, why he purchased BMWs that were armor-plated so that he can more discreetly get around town. These are some of the reasons that have been cited to us about why the White House is kind of up to here with Patel and wanted him back at headquarters.
I just have to mention the irony here, which is that the White House loves to talk about fake news and all this stuff, but they actually know the reporting is solid and good and also respond to the reporting. You don't have to say that. I'm going to say that. But just to be clear here, right? I just want to note, just to fill out the details here, Alexis Wilkins is his girlfriend's name. She'll be performing at the Windy City Smokeout in Chicago, Illinois, in the parking lot of the United Center. I have to say, a musical festival outdoors in Chicago in the summer is basically as good as it gets. You can hardly blame a guy for wanting to go. And I also got to say, all other things considered, he does seem to be a good boyfriend. But this is what Stephen Chung had to say about the reporting, and it's notable, so I'm going to read it to you. He issued a statement without responding to specific questions about Patel's canceled trip. He said, under President Trump and Director Patel's leadership at the FBI, crime across the country has plummeted to the lowest level in more than 100 years. That, by the way, is debatable, although it has gone down. And many high-profile criminals have been put behind bars. I suppose that's true, although a lot of others have been pardoned. Director Patel remains a critical player of the administration's law and order team. Notable here, there's not any denials, not any fake news, not any name-calling.
No, that's true. They reserved that for X, where they come after us for some of our reporting. Chris, we feel very solid about this, and for lots of reasons, some of which you've alluded to. I want to say hats off to the MS Now team that jumped into this breach when we began this morning, thinking we had one story, and then we had a very different one, and then we had, really moving target in terms of a potentially really huge story. The White House angry at Patel, and it's not the first time. A trip canceled on the tarmac, a big deal.
Yeah.
But I really value the colleagues on this byline: Jackie Alamany, Jake Traylor, Ken Delanian, Vaughn Hilliard. I mean, none of this would be possible without them, and thanks to all of them.
Let me just reiterate one more thing, because you said it at the top, but I just want to come back to it, because just when you think about it, you've got this reporting. He obviously is under scrutiny for these trips. He's obviously under scrutiny for flying the plane and reporting in which, again, I'm going to quote, this is actually from a letter to Patel by Raskin Senator Durbin that says, a credible source relayed, you told field offices in a meeting last year, if you have golf, hockey, fishing, or hunting in beautiful sites, you're going to see a lot of me. Not really hiding the ball there. After this reporting, he's sitting on the tarmac to go to Chicago, which just happens to be the city that his girlfriend is performing at a musical festival, and has arranged a visit to the Chicago field offices. It feels like he's doing the thing, right? The whole reporting you had yesterday is he comes up with these sort of ostensible cover stories for travel so that he can go and hang out. And now here he is sitting on the tarmac this morning, bound for Chicago for ostensibly a visit to the field office.
Yes. And, this is kind of what got him into such hot water with Trump the last time. I mean, we have this reporting from a while ago now, Chris, but just to underline it for your viewers, who I know are paying close attention to you and what you have to say, let me just repeat. In February, when we reported that Kash Patel was on the tarmac about to leave for Milan, and that FBI agents internally said he was going because he wanted to see the men's ice hockey team play in the Olympics, we were told by the FBI, oh, no, it's a business trip. And we got all this these pieces of paper, essentially, that said he's got this meeting, he's got that meeting, he's got all this security stuff he's working on, he's got a diplomatic meeting. And later on, we learned from FBI sources that no, all of those were arranged as cover for him to go see the men's ice hockey team play at the Olympics, which they won. Amazing. I'm sure a lot of people would have liked to be there. But Kash Patel could not say, honestly, that, he went because he wanted to see the men's ice hockey team play in the Olympics. That is not something he could apparently deign to say.
Right.
But yet that's what all the records show. And this pattern, I'm really glad you flagged the tarmac moment, because he's getting a letter from a huge Trump ally saying, can you please answer my questions about your travel and why it's justified?
Yes.
And then he's heading to Chicago to go see his girlfriend play, which is one of the things he got in trouble with Trump with before. The hockey was kind of almost the last straw for Donald Trump. He really confronted Kash Patel and said, It's not a good look, dude. It's not a good look. And yet, such an important point for you to highlight that this is literally what he was doing Friday morning until it got cut short.
Love will make a person do crazy things. Kara Lennig, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
This week, there are growing questions over what exactly is happening with Senator Mitch McConnell. His office has provided very little information since he was hospitalized on June 14th after an unspecified medical incident. The most recent statement released last week merely said that he appreciates the outpouring of support he's receiving as he recovers and that he's working with staff while Congress is in recess. Meanwhile, lawmakers are preparing to return to Capitol Hill on Monday, and they have until the end of September to pass a bill to fund the government. Yes, it's pretty important. And of course, McConnell is not just an ordinary senator. The former leader is a member of the powerful Appropriations Committee, where Democrats and Republicans are currently locked in a stalemate over defense funding. Also not a small thing. MS Now's Alex Tabbitt has been speaking with McConnell's constituents in Frankfort, Kentucky, and Michael Schnell is our congressional reporter on Capitol Hill, and Philip Bump's still with us. Michael, we've heard some growing rumblings that Republican lawmakers themselves are having some questions over Mitch McConnell, what's going on with him. How concerned are they, and how does this impact business as usual on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, Ariel, we've reached the point where McConnell's absence is not just a concern among Democrats, but Republicans are itching for more information as well. Mitch McConnell first admitted to the hospital on June 14th, and we still, to this point, do not know why he was put in the hospital and what his condition is. We do know that he has spoken to some top Republicans. He spoke to John Thune, according to Thune's spokesperson. He spoke to the second highest ranking Senate Republican, John Barrasso, earlier this week. But again, we still don't know what his condition is, and the concerns are rising on both sides of the aisle. We heard from Nancy Mace, the Republican congresswoman from South Carolina, who said that if Mitch McConnell's condition is as bad as it seems it is, he should step aside. We've also heard from Marlin Stutzman, a Republican from Indiana, who said that Mitch McConnell owes it to his constituents to tell them why he is absent. At the end of the day, it's the constituents and those voters of Kentucky who put him into the job. Now, in terms of the logistical impacts of this, we will start to see it up on Capitol Hill. As you mentioned, Mitch McConnell is a key member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. In fact, he's the top Republican. He's the chairman of the subcommittee that deals with defense spending, which is going to be so key as this war with Iran continues and as we get closer to that September 30th deadline. But Ariel, I've been speaking to a number of Republican lawmakers in recent days, as well as aides and staffers. Nobody seems to know what Mitch McConnell's condition is, though notable, the Senate will be back in session next week, and I would assume this will be a top topic of conversation.
It is incredibly concerning. Of course, we wish him the best, whatever may be going on. Alex, you're in Louisville. You're in Kentucky, traversing the state. What are the voters there telling you about this situation?
Well, Ariel, we've been talking to Republicans here. We've been talking to Democrats here. We've been talking to people who don't vote at all here. And they're all telling us the exact same thing. They want answers from their Senator, Mitch McConnell. Take a listen to what they had to say.
How do you feel right now with your senator MIA for a month?
Oh, lied to, deceived, betrayed. He's supposed to be our people. He's supposed to be representing us, and he's not. He's not. He's not even giving anyone an update.
We got old people trying to stay in the place in that power and designing who gets the seat after them.
My goodness, your retirement is long overdue. Give up this fight. Give it up. We don't want you. You're not representing us well, so don't represent us at all.
And Ariel, we've also been asking these voters if they want term limits or age limits for the politicians that we send to Washington, D.C. To a T, every single one of them has said yes. That also matches public opinion polling, which shows that the American public is overwhelmingly in favor for those types of limitations. So the question must be asked, if the people want it, why don't we have it? Ariel?
Okay, so let's start there. If the people want it, why don't we have it? You know, you have a growing chorus of even lawmakers on both sides of the aisle concerned about the aging Congress. Sure. You have some young blood there, too. And you had former Senator and presidential candidate Mitt Romney asked about all of this in an interview. He said, I basically think that people who are 80 and above really should not be running the world or running the country. Are these calls going to create any kind of pressure to make there be age limits in Congress and also in higher office in general?
I mean, potentially. The challenge, obviously, is that there are a lot of people who are over the age of 80 who are still in power, and the people who are in power have the power to decide what changes, right? I do think there's context. I wrote a book about the baby boom, came out a couple of years ago. Part of this is simply that Americans are living older because the baby boom has gotten to be, past retirement age. The oldest baby boomer turned 80 in January. So part of this is just there's a big group of Americans who are within that age group. This is, to some extent, a little bit of a bubble, as we've seen with the baby boom since the beginning. I also think it's worth pointing out that Mitch McConnell has been in poor health for a long time. Like, he's been, having trouble walking. He's stumbled several times. So, this was a question that has lingered over time. I don't know this makes it particularly more acute, but it's a long-standing question, and it's less about age than it is just about capacity, and that, I think, is unresolved.
Yeah, and getting to the point where you have age limits is sort of the highest bar. But what about transparency? He is not the first lawmaker to face health problems for there to be a lack of transparency. We had Tom Kean recently out for several months, apparently due to depression. Senator Dianne Feinstein, who died in 2023, remained in office for months, and it was unclear what she was coping with or how severe. Should there at least be an effort at transparency before we get to the age limit?
Yes, and I think that all of those are good examples of people being out of the spotlight, but I think they're not comparable for two reasons. The first is simply Mitch McConnell has so much power and such leverage on Capitol Hill that's different than Feinstein, Kean, and others. The second is that there is this question about if he is incapacitated, which obviously none of us hope is the case, but if he is incapacitated, there is a point at which Kentucky will not, if he were unable to fulfill his role as senator, there's a point at which Kentucky moves from having, okay, then we have to have a special election, to we're just going to resolve this in November. That date is in early August. If it is the case that Mitch McConnell is unable to fulfill his duties right now, they may not want a special election to replace him because it may empower someone like Thomas Massie, who's not beloved by the Republican establishment. So there are other machinations at play here, potentially. I don't want to, conspiracy theorize or anything along those lines, but this is a real consideration in terms of preserving that seat and preserving power.
It's not conspiracy to recognize the political implications of having a major figure there out of commission, at least not. We don't know where he is.
Yeah, right. I mean, he could also answer this question, right? Like, tell us, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Alex Habit, Michael Schnell, thank you for your reporting. Philip, you're still here with me.
Let's bring in MS Now congressional reporter Michael Schnell, MS Now contributor and chief White House correspondent at the New York Times, Peter Baker, and Aaron David Miller, senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. It's good to see all of you guys this morning. So, Aaron, I'll start with you. The U.S. and Iran have been trading these strikes now again for days. We're seeing this continued escalation. What sign, what signal does the president's post from this morning send to you?
I think confusion and the fact the president's in a box. Look, the MOU is designed to achieve two purposes, much like the Gaza deal in October 2025, end the war, number one, and open the straits. It was a short-term fix, kicking all the other issues down the road. The problem, Antonio, is that these two objectives, ending the war and opening the straits, are fundamentally irreconcilable. The Iranians have weaponized geography. They do not intend to give up their leverage and control. They want to turn the straits into an ATM machine. In addition to being able, it's their new nuclear weapon. And the administration is now caught in a bind. Either they escalate in an effort to change Iran's calculations, 40 days of war didn't do that, or they begin to acquiesce in what is a very uncomfortable and unfavorable reality, that the straits that we knew, February 27, 28, choose your cliche, horses left the barn, genie's out of the bottle. They're not going back to the way they were. This is the problem with the war of choice that has now pushed the administration into very unpalatable options.
Michael, give me the view from Capitol Hill, and particularly from your Republican sources here, as they look at what's happening overseas and understand that continuing escalation means continuing domestic instability here at home.
Yeah, Antonia, I've been talking to Republican members of Congress for the recent days about the president saying the ceasefire is over, and the consensus has been 3 points. First off, members saying they're not surprised that the ceasefire is over. Some folks even questioning, was there ever a ceasefire in place at all? They sort of expected it to end up here, given the kind of actor that Iran is, and given the fact that our two countries were still hostile towards each other in that time. Secondly, they said that they want President Trump to finish this war because they think that given the place where we are now and how invested we are and how far into this we are, they don't want to let Iran off the hook. They want to finish the job. But the third matter that came into play, Antonia, was the fact that this is not going to reflect well on Republicans. With fighting continuing, there is going to be inflated gas prices. As you mentioned, they're already up. Republicans control all levers of power right now, the House, the Senate, and the White House, which means that increasing those gas prices is going to negatively reflect on Republicans. And members are very clear-eyed that that could impact them come November. I spoke to one House Republican who said those gas signs that have the prices on them are 2 feet long and they are raised in the air and everybody can see it. There's no way to ignore it. And they're worried that this is going to impact them negatively come the midterms. But, and it's an important but, they believe that the ends will justify the means given the fact that Iran needs to be defeated.
Well, Peter, I guess I want your reaction to some of what Michael just laid out there. Is the president and his inner circle aware of the position they have put the rest of the Republican Party in here? Because even if they have their own individual views about what would be best to do about Iran, the reality is voters have made their feelings about this entire situation very, very clear. And really, finish the job is not acceptable to them. So all-out war, once again, not acceptable to voters. But also just living with elevated gas prices and kind of a constant hum of escalation back and forth and flip-flopping isn't going over so well either.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to remember this is the first war in the history of polling in the United States that the public was against from the very start. Okay, they never supported this war, and in part because the president never told them why they were going to war in the first place. He made very little effort to prepare the public, to rally support, to explain to voters what was at stake here, what his goals were, what the cost might be, what it might look like, any of that stuff. And so literally from day one, the American public was against this war, and that's been a problem hanging over the Republicans ever since. The president said it would be just 4 to 6 weeks. We're now 5 months almost since it began. And it doesn't seem to be likely to end in any time soon. Now, it's not going to be the full-scale bombardment and so forth that we saw early on. It seems like we're kind of in this middle stage where we don't have any kind of peace deal, but we don't actually have the full-scale war either, which is kind of an unsatisfying place to be, but it may be the only place that the president can find himself at this point. There's not going to be a clear-cut deal anytime soon. It doesn't look like. This memorandum of understanding that he called the beginning of the first peace in the Middle East in 3,000 years only lasted a couple of weeks. It's a memorandum of misunderstanding, and this was the easy part. They hadn't even gotten to the hard part. So this is going to keep going now for quite a while. And to Michael's point, we're only a month or so, maybe 2 months away from the beginning of early voting when people are getting out there. And people's minds are already pretty much set on this. So the Republicans are not happy about this at all.
Aaron, there's also this exclusive Wall Street Journal reporting that the Israelis informed the United States that Iranian leaders were hatching a fresh plot to kill President Trump. We know already that this is something that a sort of form of revenge that they have been thinking about for a while. That reporting goes back months and months. But I'm curious what your read is, A, of this allegation that the Iranians would be seeking to assassinate Trump in the midst of this messy MOU, and also of the timing. Some experts have sort of said that they think it might be questionable, that they think Israel has motivations to sort of turn Trump further and further against the Iranians and mess up the negotiations and keep mediators from being able to get the job done. How do you read what this means and what this represents for any hope of peace?
I mean, you'd want to confirm through American intelligence, but I don't doubt that the Israeli reports are probably accurate. In 2024, you had a credible intelligence community assess. They had a credible and serious effort by Iranians to create circumstances to kill the president. And then you had an actual criminal case, which had been unsealed with an IRGC operative who was in the planning stages of trying to do that. Look, it elevates this whole thing to the personal and the existential, right? I mean, the Israelis and or the Americans on February 28th killed Ali Khamenei. And the Iranians, all of the signage in and around and the propaganda in and around the funeral of Ali Khamenei, it seems to present a threat against the president. I don't think the Iranians have the capacity to do it, but they still haven't repaid their debt for Trump's killing of Qasem Soleimani in January of 2020. So I think it's real, but it's not going to change the overall dynamic of this conflict. A war of choice is now producing what I'm afraid is going to be a flawed sort of peace of necessity. And that necessity is not going to redound to the advantage and the national interest of the United States.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up, Aaron, about Rahm Emanuel and his recent remarks in Tel Aviv? I'm sure you've seen. I was struck by one part of his remarks where he's talking about that saying that when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. He said, quote, Israel will become a prisoner of its own tools. Your military is a hammer, such that to the prime minister, Netanyahu, every security challenge is a nail. What do you think Rahm's speech in Tel Aviv tells us about the state of U.S. and Israeli relations and what comes next?
You know, I worked in administrations, Jimmy Carter to Bush 43, and I'd throw in Obama and Biden as well. I've never seen the foundational supports of this relationship under greater threat and under greater stress. Common and shared values is being undermined, a high coincidence of interests, certainly on Iran, on the Palestinian issue, and then the adhesive that has bound the U.S.-Israeli relationship together for decades. That adhesive is bipartisanship, and that is cracking now. You have at least 3 different Democratic views on Israel and at least 2 Republican views. So the old axiom that being good on Israel leads to success in American politics, that can no longer be taken for granted, to say the least.
Peter, I want to return back home and talk about this housing bill debacle for a minute. So the president is not going to sign this bipartisan housing affordability bill. He's also not vetoing it, which means at midnight it will still go into effect unless something changes. Walk me through how this is going to play out, you think, in the midterms. It seems like part of the problem here is even if it goes into law later tonight, the Republicans missed out on their chance to have their photo op, their ceremony, the story told to the voters about what they got done.
Yeah, it's kind of an own goal, and it's kind of hard to understand, right? He's trying to use this, or at least he was trying to use this as leverage to get the Senate to pass a bill on voting restrictions that the Senate can't pass and is unrelated to the housing bill. And so because they can't pass it, he is protesting by not signing it. I guess that's the logic. But you're right. As a matter of politics, how this helps him is not really clear, because the Republicans wanted to run on this fall. They wanted to say, we're concerned about affordability. Remember, just the other day, the president said affordability is just a made up word. Well, OK, he made $2 billion last year. His disclosure reforms just showed us. But a lot of Americans didn't. And affordability is a big issue this fall. And this is taking one of the tools that the Republicans were hoping to use in the campaign away from them. It's going to be a lot harder for them to say, hey, we made things better, if the president himself refused to sign the legislation they would like to brag about. And the Democrats now have an obvious talking point. Why he handed that to them is really unclear. And it raises a lot of questions among a lot of Republicans who keep asking the question about whether the president even wants to win the midterms, or whether he's, either intentionally or unintentionally seeming to sabotage his own party.
What are your plans for the housing bill, Mr. President?
I don't know. I think it's so unimportant by compared to the Save America Act. Here's what I would like to sign. Much more than a bill, that big deal. It's a yawn. Some people say it's wonderful. To me, compared to the Save America Act, just about everything is a big yawn.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York, and I'm Jackie Alamany in for Nicole Wallace. Despite his claims to the contrary, billionaire Donald Trump doesn't seem to care about the needs of the American people. Because when given the chance to make things better, like making homes more affordable, he chooses not to. What he described there as a big yawn was a bill that passed with bipartisan support, a rarity these days, that would help make the housing market more accessible to everyday Americans. Trump did not sign it, saying he wouldn't do so unless Republicans passed the SAVE Act, a controversial bill that gives the federal government more control over elections. That was 10 days ago, and Trump still has not signed the housing bill. Unless he actually vetoes it, the legislation will quietly go into effect tonight, even without a signature. Trump has been putting his fragile ego and pettiness over his 2020 election loss ahead of legislation that would actually help American lives. And it's remarkable because Trump could actually take credit for a legislative win here. And yet, he isn't. As opposed to when he took credit for something that isn't even his doing. Earlier this week, Trump said on social media that Walmart would be lowering prices, specifically beef prices, and that they were doing so at his administration's request. Yet reporting from our colleague Catherine Rampel in The Bulwark finds, in Walmart's case, a spokesperson that the retailer began one of its regular price rollback events earlier last week, i.e., the week before Trump blasted out his claim that price cuts were imminent and would be happening at his request. So, an out-of-touch Trump is where we begin this hour. Political analyst and host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, is here. Also with us, Media Matters for America, Angelo Carusone. And with me at the table, Democratic strategist and Columbia University professor, political analyst Basil Smikle, plus founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader, is here. She's here despite the traffic and despite just running down 43rd Street. So for that, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, World Cup.
What is your assessment of what is going on here? I think we've heard a lot of different takes that the president's primary impetus and motivation here is to hang on to the Republican Party and that his control over the party is ultimately more important to him than anything. But I feel like after we've seen his financial disclosure last week, crypto returns amounting to $3.8 billion, that there's something else going on here. What's your take on all of this?
Well, first of all, aside from the irony of him referencing yawning on virtually any topic, that seems like a bad call considering how often he's falling asleep in the middle of critical meetings. But look, it starts to feel like actually he really does mean it, that at this point he has so little filter left that he doesn't care about the housing bill. And I think it's in part because he didn't do it. It was a Senate and a House that came together despite him to solve problems for the American people. And increasingly, it starts to look like if he didn't shape it, if he didn't call for it, if he didn't own it from beginning to end, which he feels that he did with the SAVE Act, that he wants nothing to do with it. And he doesn't seem to really care whether it affects the American people or not. And housing, of all things, this is the construction president. He's supposed to love this. But he's so focused on his own house, well, the one that is his house for now, his temporary home, and remodeling it. He doesn't seem to worry very much about the rest of America.
And Angelo, for all the conversations that you and I have had over the influence and the way that critics of Donald Trump are actually able to permeate and get through to his supporters when they disagree with what the president is doing. And that trickle-down effect, sometimes being quite slow. It seems like this issue is something that is actually resonating with voters, with 60% of voters disapproving of Trump's handling of the economy and 33% approving, his lowest rating ever on this question. Why is this resonating more than anything else?
You can't ignore it. You can't lie your way out of it. You can't tell, you can't do this sort of fake performance and hope people sort of pick up onto the story you're telling because they're living the reality. It's impossible to disconnect the prices and in particular gas prices from their day-to-day reality. And that's the big part of this. And it's worth noting two things. That one, they spent quite a lot of time under the Biden years explaining and socializing to their audience the connective relationship between gas prices and every other thing in their lives. They really built that connective tissue as a media ecosystem. It wasn't just Trump. It was the larger right-wing media apparatus that he relies on now. And so the audience is already baked into and to understand the relationship that gas is going to have an effect on my day-to-day life. The other thing to consider, and you can hear that playing out in the callers. I always like to listen to what the callers say, and they're calling in to complain about this. In talk radio and Megyn Kelly's show, across the board, it is clearly penetrating the audience. On the other hand, and this is the warning sign, a lot of the personalities, and that's the thing Trump is listening to, are saying, do the performance. Go after the Republican Party for not doing enough to push the SAVE Act. And I think that's the real tell here, because Trump has already decided that he can't get the voters. So he's going to orient the next couple of months to getting the votes. And that means manipulating the election in one way, shape, or form. So at the end of the day, he doesn't really care about people because he's actually going after something quite different.
But Basil, is there a world in which if this president decided to act like a normal president and campaign on policies such as the housing bill that is going into effect tonight, and maybe some of the other wins, small wins, at least if you are talking to Democrats, but still wins nonetheless, that he has decided to skim over or at least cloud with his lack of message discipline, that the president wouldn't need to be forcing the SAVE Act down lawmakers' throats right now and wouldn't need to be finding these other ways to exert control over an election that he seems destined to lose right now.
Well, you know, it's interesting because any other president, and in fact, any other speaker would do anything everything they needed to do to protect their members. That's what they do, right? They would create legislation, sign legislation. What's interesting is that legislatively, you know, he's not doing that, but, you know, they are having a midterm convention in Texas this year. And the reason that that's important is because it's less about policy and more about, I want the accolades, I want the adulation to try essentially and run again when he can't run again. But let me speak a little bit about the legislation itself.
Yeah.
Because there are two pieces to this. The SAVE Act is a really draconian act. But the fact that so many people feel that their votes might be disenfranchised, that they may be disenfranchised, that the vote might not count, is actually, in my view, pushing an overperformance of Democrats because they want to make sure that their votes count given what's coming out of D.C. On the flip side, the Housing Act is critically important because it gets rid of the private equity and institutional investors in housing that are buying up large amounts of property. It's actually making, in many ways, housing more affordable, particularly in the suburbs that are 5-6 times now the cost, 5-6 times the cost of the median income. That's important because Democrats see this bill as an opportunity for affordable housing. Republicans see it as an opportunity for reduced regulation and construction. There's something for everybody, and he chose not to sign it.
Yeah. And also, we should note that the latest attempt to jam the SAVE Act through at any sort of expense is the recent decision, the decision he made yesterday to fire the commissioners from the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission. But Tim, I didn't forget about you. Let's talk about Hakeem Jeffries' take on what's going on here. He posted on X, Republicans would rather make it harder to vote than easier to afford a home. When people show you who they are, believe them. Is this the right message from Democrats on this eve of the housing bill going into effect?
I think it's related to the right message. I'm not going to nitpick every tweet Hakeem Jeffries sends. You know, I mean, there's some that hit a little harder than others, but I think it's important just to kind of keep the pressure on Trump. I think that the Democrats, for me, I think that the best message they have kind of is this umbrella message about what we were talking about at the beginning of the segment, which is Donald Trump like caring more about his house than theirs, and kind of tying corruption to, you know, the economic struggles that regular people are facing. And Donald Trump's made that very easy for them because he says over and over again that he's bored by the housing question, and he has obviously, I think it's obvious to anyone paying attention that his focus is on the remodeling of the White House and you know, the Kennedy Center and the marble armrests, and like this is what he cares about. He doesn't care about making things better, more affordable for people. He calls that a hoax, the idea that affordability is an issue. So I just think if the Democrats can kind of have a two birds with one stone thing here, where they can go after him on his corruption, and also just talk about how that money that he's wasting and using in D.C. is like not going to help their lives. Like they're not getting a new a new room in their school or a new room in their hospital. Trump's getting a new room at the White House. And I think that's the right message for them. The other funny thing about this for the Democrats, Jack, and you talked a lot of, in your reporting, the Republicans, my old people, the more mainstream kind of the old guard Republicans. And oftentimes over the years, they've said, hey, we can't buck Trump on this stuff. We can't vote against tariffs. We can't vote for Ukraine funding because Trump's too powerful. We don't want to lose our seat. Like, it's a political imperative that you stick around with Trump because Trump's so powerful. I find it very funny and ironic that, like, by accident on this housing bill, they bucked Trump because they didn't know that he was going to have this temper tantrum over the SAVE Act. And look at what happened. This thing's going to go into effect at midnight because Trump's not going to veto it. There's a bipartisan veto-proof majority. All Trump's going to do is whine about it on social media. None of these Republicans are going to lose their jobs over it. Like, we've spent 10 years being told that they can't have a backbone, they can't demonstrate any courage because they're worried that they'll lose their seat if they do. And here we see on the housing bill that actually this whole time they could have. Like, Trump's not as strong as they think.
Wall Street Journal is out with a new two-part feature detailing what it describes as Europe's rupture with the United States following this week's NATO summit in Turkey. The Journal reports that President Trump's tariffs and his threats to take Greenland have spurred a, quote, rebellion by top European leaders who are now drawing limits on so-called flattery diplomacy. Reading from the piece, quote, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has tried hard to appease the Trump administration by flattering Trump. You saw him there saying nothing while Spain was being insulted, while promising that European countries will spend 5% of their GDP on defense-related expenditures and will continue to buy American weapons, whatever it takes to keep the U.S. committed to the alliance. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, by contrast, has argued that the West is undergoing a rupture. The old America, he has told European leaders, isn't coming back. And they must start building up their own defense systems and technological platforms that don't rely on America. Joining us now, two co-authors of that piece, World Enterprise Team Chief at the Wall Street Journal, Joe Parkinson, and Wall Street Journal senior reporter Drew Hinshaw.
Joe and Drew, thank you so much for being with us. We heard some of this in the first term, Donald Trump's first term. Angela Merkel at one point said, hey, you got to stop counting on America. We're going to have to look elsewhere. But nothing like what we've seen, especially this week. You guys talking about sort of this flattery diplomacy going by the wayside. Giorgia Meloni yesterday and throughout the week just unloading on Donald Trump and being beloved in her home country for doing it. And, of course, Prime Minister Sanchez doing the same thing. Talk about what has changed here and why European leaders now are openly being confrontational to Trump when he insults them.
Well, we at the Wall Street Journal spent a few months talking to prime ministers, senior officials across Europe, intelligence officials, because we wanted to get inside the candid conversations that are really happening here in Europe. And it's true, on the surface, you still see Mark Rutte flattering the president, calling him daddy even, this kind of, it's called flattery diplomacy. That's to keep Trump engaged in NATO. Under the surface, European governments, especially after Greenland, are starting to think that the U.S. might be evolving here from just an ally that's a bit unpredictable to one that is potentially becoming, on some issues, hostile, even a threat. And so they're reassessing their relationship. They're speaking extremely with a lot of mistrust. There's a lot of mistrust in this relationship. And they are re-engineering the world's most powerful military alliance to be less overly dependent on a single country, the United States.
And you mentioned just before the segment that Trump had casually sort of resurrected the idea of taking Greenland, and it really was Greenland that was the moment, the threshold moment, I think, that created a crisis between the allies. That President Macron, in one of these meetings that we've managed to get access to, said there is no going back. In that meeting where the European leaders all met without phones, they met without a written record, without a recording of the meeting so they could speak frankly, said to each other that they can no longer tolerate this, said to each other that the Belgian Prime Minister said, if this continues, it'll be like we are America's miserable slave. They spoke for 5 hours. They called it a therapy session. And so while that is just one meeting, it represents this threshold moment. And I think what you're seeing is this very clear duopoly, if you like, between the public comments at NATO, where we still see the flattery and we still see the bonhomie, and what's happening in private, where the Europeans have decided that they need to make a plan to be less reliant on the United States.
Drew, that is an extraordinary scene that you all describe. You have European leaders in what they call the space egg, the safe space at the European Council, where they can speak candidly, and you have Macron, as you said, there's no going back. We have to draw a line here with Greenland. And interesting that the president just a couple of days ago is talking again about the United States needing control of Greenland strategically. So, Drew, I guess the question is, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of therapy sessions behind the scenes. How is this rupture, as Carney called it, manifesting itself in policy, economic, defense, and otherwise?
Yeah. Well, Europe is spending hundreds of billions of euros, hundreds of billions of dollars to create their own defense technology platforms that are outside America's control. Let me give you an example. Some of European governments, when they talk to each other, their most sensitive conversations right now, as I speak to you, go through Elon Musk's satellites. The weapon systems being used in Ukraine, European weapon systems, they rely on Starlink connections. And governments they're putting their own satellites in space. Europe is putting hundreds of satellites in space specifically so that they can have conversations that don't go through Elon Musk's systems, and so that their weapon systems, for example, aren't reliant on where Elon Musk comes down. And he's been very helpful in Ukraine, but they don't want to build an alliance that's dependent on one person. France has ordered 2.5 million civil servants to stop using Microsoft Office, to stop using Microsoft Teams, and to start using French or European software. Governments from Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, France again, they are creating their own messaging platform so that government officials don't they don't do official business over apps like WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook's Meta. So there's a real de-Americanization, if you can call it, that's happening inside NATO. And this is very unusual because it's still an alliance that is extremely interwoven and, of course, dependent on the United States.
Joe, congratulations on the piece. I read it. It reads like a kind of international spy thriller with all these leaders huddling in a room to kind of talk about the villain on the other side of the Atlantic. It's great reporting. You talk a lot about Mark Carney and his role in the piece of trying to make Europeans feel they don't have to do this flattery game with Donald Trump anymore. What's Mark Carney's strategy? Because although Europe is spending more on defense and we're seeing the money come in, they've got problems with capacity, they've got problems with coordination. Is there also a feeling that Mark Carney has a blueprint for how the decoupling with America can work in practice?
That is a great question, and I think it's really the question, whether the reality is keeping up with the rhetoric. It's one thing to say, as Mark Carney has done, this critique that since the Second World War, the alliance has been like a wheel, with America as the indispensable hub and all of the allies as spokes. And in his view, the allies need to be not spokes dependent on the hub. There needs to be a new model of more integration and less dependence just on one particular ally. It's going to be a very long road. The changes that Drew is describing are massive. They're mostly happening sort of behind closed doors, if you like. It's not something that people are talking about too openly, because this is the plumbing of the alliance, the plumbing that's connected the parties, since the Second World War. But one thing's for sure, that none of this has been tested before. And the other thing that's fascinating about Mark Carney's role is, really, Mark Carney would not be Prime Minister if it wasn't for the 51st state comments that President Trump made at the beginning of his second term. Those comments, I think, to many people in America sounded like they were just throwaway lines or a bit glib, but to the Canadians and to the Carney administration as it was sworn in and reading the intelligence reports, it was incredibly serious, and it changed minds, so that the Canadians really were trying to advocate with the Europeans since the very, very early days of Carney's prime ministership that we should have a different strategy, we should be less reliant. It's